Thanks very much, Rob. Welcome everybody to our latest Chamber of Solutions. I'm Ross McNally. I'm the Chief Executive and Executive Chair at Hampshire Chamber of Commerce. Today really is an opportunity for us all to share our thinking and our perspectives on the kind of challenges that we've experienced not only in the last 18 months, but as we move forward and pull out of the current situation and really start to reshape our economy and our own individual businesses. Today, I'd firstly like to thank Rob and his team at Mission Performance for hosting this and so ably, as we know from all of the events that we put on, chairing the event. Today is really about a very open discussion, so I'd encourage you all to put your cameras on so we can see you, and when needed, just please ask your questions, proffer some answers and some solutions to each other, because this is really a big community of practice. This is about how you can help each other to achieve the kind of changes that you know are so important. We are supported today by Fareham Borough Council, so I'd like to thank them. But importantly, today is within the Andover Business Week, and so this is a key event at our Andover Business Week. There are events in Andover, both virtually and live, throughout the whole of the week. So please book onto those, get involved, get actively involved in those. And it's nice to see that Liana is here today, who's our chair of the Andover Chamber Business Strategy Group, and has been putting on all of this programming. Now, there's going to be a lot of topics and discussion today from a very expert panel, but I just thought I'd say just a couple of words to start with, because I think all of this is really about challenging our thinking and approaches. There's no doubt that we've all had to kind of, in a way, invigorate our brand, our values in the marketplace. And in order to do that, the real tests and the challenges that we've had is about a focus on our culture, on the way we operate internally. And so I see it as something that a phrase that we've started to use as a chamber is really about unlocking your potential. You know, there is entrepreneurialism in your business. It's about finding it and releasing it. It's about enabling and empowering your people to know that they are part of that solution, part of that journey towards a more successful future for your business. But you need to have a very refreshed culture to be able to enable that. You know, it is about a form of authentic leadership, which really does release the power and the potential of the people all around you, so that they feel confident that they can bring those kinds of new thinking, new energy and solutions to your business. And out of that, you reinvent yourself from within. It's also about building collaborations. I do know that, you know, we've seen a lot of phraseology, you know, collaboration's the new competition, but I'm a believer in that. I do actually think that most successful businesses, especially actually say larger businesses, they collaborate and cooperate with their competition, because they're all in the same sector, and it's about building the kind of supply and the kind of resource to make the industry sector succeed. We can all do that at whatever level and in whatever operation that we have. So it is about building resources jointly. It is about working together to achieve success across supply, wherever that might be found, something very pertinent today. But it is also about bringing something fresh to the market from beyond your own individual resourcing. Through that sort of collaboration, you can really, mutual collaboration, you can really make a difference, and then that sets your company on a new path and gives you new opportunities. So there's a lot of exciting stuff out there, and I think we're going to hear from the panel today around those themes and other themes. But the real key is to take it on, you know, drive forward and see it as a real positive, as a challenge that you welcome. And really, the last 18 months has just put a watershed moment there to enable you to say, I'm going to accelerate that, and I'm going to do it now. I will pop up and say a few things along the way, I'm sure. That is my way. But I may also be looking at resources and other things and putting them on the chat. But importantly, we want to hear from you. So get your questions ready, get some of your solutions and some of your experiences together and share them across the group. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Ross. A quick introduction. Rob Lewis from Mission Performance. We've got an office down on Lee on the Solent, overlooking Solent Airport, and been working with the Chamber for a good 3 or 4 years now. As a business, we improve to raise standards of leadership, teamwork, and communication for our clients. Do that in the UK and globally, with a very much a focus on sparking long-term behaviour change through high-quality coaching and training delivered on all formats now. I hope to share some of the mistakes that we've made and some of the successes at Mission Performance with you, and hopefully that will provide some insight for you from our humble perspective at Mission Performance. More importantly, our panel. The first, Craig, may I invite you to provide a quick introduction.
Brilliant, thank you, Rob, and really nice to see some familiar faces, even a familiar zebra on the session today. So thank you very much for having me. So I currently run a company called Score. We are a software company which we provide software for process improvement, and we're all about making process improvement accessible and sustainable for businesses of all sizes. My background, I've spent it's now over 20 years working in this space, and having worked with organizations of all sizes, from small startups, including my own, right through to global enterprises, and working in many different countries. And process improvement, certainly in the areas that I've been working in, it's all about helping organizations understand how they work today so that they can improve or change something in the future. And generally we're looking at different aspects of a business. So typically most organizations are constantly trying to juggle the demands of managing costs so that they can stay profitable, ensuring that they're providing a good customer experience and quality so that they can maintain existing customers or grow their customer base. And at the same time, trying to ensure that they comply with all the rules and regulations that are relevant to their particular industry. And these three things are sometimes in conflict with each other. And so a big part of process improvement is trying to bring clarity and transparency to the whole organization, so you can really start to understand how these things are impacting each other. But at the same time, and as relevant to this discussion, is that organizations are constantly having to deal with major changes, strategic changes. Maybe it's looking at a new market that you want to enter, or launching a new product, or indeed having to deal with some sort of major disruption like a pandemic. You see these kind of major projects come down the road, and it could be under the guise of digital transformation, which is a term that sometimes make me shudder a little bit. And this is often like driving a truck through all of those other initiatives, and can really upset all of the other things that you're trying to juggle as an organization. So being able to have very sort of clear view of how the organization works, and making sure that that view is not just from the top looking down, but actually right across the organization, is essential to ensuring that sort of smooth running of the business. But also it's about giving everybody in the organization a platform to be able to, or a forum rather, to be able to talk about how they can improve things. How can we innovate within the business? And those might be micro changes that you're making to day-to-day operations, or indeed it could be significant changes or different ways of doing things within the business. And again, it could lead to things like new products or new markets that you're entering. And so given that background and an area that I've been involved in the last 20 years, one of the things that I was really interested in this discussion and a particular topic was around this idea of your existing resources not being a limiting factor to your growth or your strategies for growth. And your resources could be anything from the people that you have in the organization to the tools, equipment, plant, locations, buildings, offices, all of those sorts of things combined that you need to make the organization or the business work. And whatever of those themes that I talked about that we've been involved in the past, so whether we're looking at sort of cost reduction exercises or whether we're looking at managing compliance and ensuring compliance with rules and regulations, it requires us to look at the organization and to understand how the organization's working today. And I never fail to be surprised by the amount of times that going through that sort of exercise, so simply mapping out what the business does today collaboratively with people in the business, how we so often find these situations where there's an enormous amount of duplication of effort going on, or the wrong person's doing the wrong thing. And that's anything from really simple examples like where we find people copying data from spreadsheets, from one spreadsheet to another, when you probably have perfectly good systems to do that, or a system could be implemented easily. Another one is where people are doing, you'll find two people doing the same thing and doing it in slightly different ways, which again causes these issues with customer experience and quality. But taking this example of people copying in data in a spreadsheet, one of my favorite stories from our recent customers was one where during a conversation about how the team booked people onto training courses, a comment was made about, I copy the email address from this spreadsheet and I paste it into Outlook and send it. And not an eye was, Nyla, a lid was blinked at that at the time. But sort of we scratched the surface a little bit to ask a bit more about what was happening there. And what they were doing is they were actually copying and pasting a lot more than just email addresses from spreadsheets into emails in Outlook. But they were doing it hundreds of times a day. And so when asked about how long does this take to do it, it takes, well, it's 2 or 3 seconds. So it's not something that I worry about. But when we multiplied it out over the number of times it happens, it turned out to be around 80 days worth of effort per year in this team, simply copying and pasting data, when they had a perfectly good customer relationship management system that could actually do all of that for them. And another example we saw recently was with a timber merchant, where the owner of the business, who was also the main salesperson for the business, again sat down to talk about how they could look at starting to automate some of the processes. And in that simple discussion, identified that there was a bunch of administrative work that the owner was doing as part of every single sale that he did. And in that conversation, the office manager said, well, I could do that for you. How long are you spending on that? And he was spending nearly a whole day a week. And so that sort of realization that actually I can get a whole extra day to spend on sales, which is unlocking all of these new opportunities from the business. So I think it's really important that when you're thinking about growth and how you're going to achieve it, that it's important to also hold the mirror up and reflect on what's happening today within your business, and are there things that you can actually unlock today that will help with growth. That might be freeing up people's time to go and do other value-adding work. Or another example is you might find other lines of business that you weren't currently exploiting. So I think that's a really important thing, is getting yourself ready for growth is a valuable exercise, and just in terms of just identifying opportunities for growth within the existing business. And I think just one other thing before I finish finish my intro, that's also of particular interest to me, as well as having done that with lots of other businesses, I've also set up and launched my own business, which is Score. As I mentioned, we're a software provider. one of the other things that you have to consider very, very carefully is that balance between the investment that you're making, both in times and money, into your business, both now and what that's going to be in the future, the risk that you're potentially taking on in doing that, and the potential reward in the future. And again, I think for those of you, it's really important not just to think about this in terms of the business itself, but you also have to think about your own personal, how it's impacting your own personal life. So you really have to think about, what do you want out of this? What risk are you prepared to take? And really, you know, what can you afford in terms of investment and time? I think that's a really important aspect to consider. I think at that point, I'll hand over to the next panelist.
Thank you, Craig. Fascinating, and looking forward to exploring some of the specifics of that, especially around our relationships with risk, our personal relationships, business relationship with risk, but also looking at innovation, creativity being an outcome of best practice. So let's pause that just for a second, and Alpa, over to you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you everyone for coming today. So my name is Alpa Shingadia, and I've been in business for the last 20 odd years. I set up my first company with a phone and a Yellow Pages, rather naively after being made redundant, actually having no idea how to run a business, because I came from big software, IBM sorts of companies working in their marketing team. And when I was made redundant, when the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, it was one of those moments where it was, okay, I can't get a job doing what I used to do, so I might as well work for myself. So I set up my first company, and I thought it was rather easy when I first started, picked up the phone, spoke to 5 small software companies, got 5 clients, and before I knew it, I had a business. Along the way, that I had my started a family, and that also gave me lots of freedoms. And running your own business, and a successful business, allows you to have your feet in both camps. Whereas in the corporate world, it's certainly less so now than it perhaps was 20 years ago. If I had to go to Paris at a drop of a hat to go and see a customer or do something, you know, having childcare issues wasn't even considered. So it was allowed me to change my outlook on life and how I wanted to work. So that was really great fun. Unfortunately, that first business actually folded in the credit crunch. And I think I probably learned more about being a successful business owner in that failure, if you like, than in all of my successes afterwards. The first business I started with, the phone and Yellow Pages, grew very, very quickly. And before I knew it, I had 10 people working for me. It was a sales and marketing outsourcing company. So any small business that didn't have marketing could outsource that entire service to my team for a monthly retainer. But the trouble is, because I had naively set up a business, I made all the classic errors that have been made in the past. I didn't put a strategy in place. I didn't look at my financials. I didn't really look at how I was going to grow the business. In essence, I built a business completely on quicksand. And as soon as the first rumble hit, which was in our sense the credit crunch, that ripple effect meant that overnight I lost 80% of my business. There was too much debt in the business. So all of these financials, which we often sort of wait till once a year when we go and see our accountant, became very important in that very rocky period. And I think the pandemic is another example, I think, of that. People, you know, applied for CBILS and things like that. And it was only upon the application process, when you're helping them through that they realized that some of their financial record keeping was not good enough. You're still applying for credit in some shape or form, and they're still going to check through all of that. So if you're not doing that from day one, you make it very difficult when you do look to acquire credit, which you may need to grow. It could be very hard to do. You know, VCs, they all look for, you know, sound financial disciplines. So one of the mistakes I made was I didn't have that in the first, in the first, if you like, earthquake. So that created, a problem with the business folded, and I had to phoenix that business. From there, I then set up another company and I formed it with a couple of partners, and that business grew, and I'm happy to say that grew very quickly into a large marketing agency. It's still going today, but I exited successfully from that in 2013. So what did I learn along the way between those two that I think makes a successful business evolve into new opportunities? Well, I think all the mistakes I made from the past was not putting a strategy in place, certainly not looking at my finances. We were hot on both of those with that second business. We, right down to the last penny, we knew where the sales were coming in, we knew what the outcomes were for everything, and there was a strategic plan that we followed religiously. But you can't just create a strategic plan, because people talk about strategy and business plans and things like that. For a successful business to evolve into new opportunities, you have to take the staff with you. That means your culture has to be right. And the culture isn't just putting a beanbag in the corner and having a foosball pet table and saying, oh, look at us, we've got culture. Culture is fundamentally a key aspect to helping a business grow, because culture allows for your staff to feel like they are part of your business. And the more they are part of your business, the better you'll get out of them. So staffing and culture go hand in hand with business growth, as does sales and marketing. But sales and marketing is very important. But as Craig was saying, having sort of the correct infrastructure and processes in place is also very key. I'm not going to go over what Craig has said, but often I come across businesses where they're doing exactly the things that Craig mentioned. So often we've got to look at all of those things. So I often say to all of my clients before we begin on a growth journey is, how's your culture? What is your staffing like? And more importantly, if we were to grow, could we sustain that growth with the current status of where the business is now? Because it's no good growing a business and then not being able to fulfill those, because again, it's built on quicksand. So it's strategy, structure, culture, infrastructure, corporate governance. They're all important parts of running a business. But actually, it is really understanding how you're going to make that growth. What does that journey look like? How do we take people with us on that journey? Because no man is an island. You're going to need your staff to sustain that growth. And that often means that you, as Craig also mentioned, you have to look inwardly. So when I'm working with clients, I'm often asking questions, what's your managerial skills like? Because these have an impact on culture. If you've got a company that has a high staff turnover, I'm particularly working with a marketing agency in Southwest London, and they have a massive high staff turnover. Now, I ran marketing agencies, and I can immediately see that they're micromanaging. They're not really allowing the staff to flourish and evolve themselves. They're not giving them the right tools. And when they are giving them the tools, they are often blunt on, you can't chop wood with a blunt axe. So let's look at these things and apply that to help the business to grow. So that's kind of the things which I deal with clients. But when it comes to things like sales and marketing, that's very important. So when I'm working with a business, that's the first place they start. How do we grow the business? Well, let's increase the sales. So we start from there, but often that's not where we actually begin the growth journey. The growth journey, once we've done strategic planning, is okay, what staff do we have? How are you running things internally? If we were to grow the business and increase sales, what is the current standing that you have right now? Can we fulfill that? If we have to hire more people, that's going to affect your bottom line, because whatever you increase in sales, it's going to have an impact on your profits anyway. And you might find that you're still staying exactly where you are for that first year, but next year you'll see the benefit of that growth. So it's those types of challenges that I sort of have to deal with my clients on a day-to-day basis. I think that getting the business owner to look at themselves, great businesses that evolve and grow on to be more successful, they have really good leaders. So sometimes it is looking in the mirror and saying, okay, how can I be better at what I'm doing? To me, a great business is a business that does not need the leader in there. The leader is there just, to front the business. My view in life was always hire great people, move the obstacles out the way, and more importantly, for me to move out the way. So the second business that I grew, which I exited from, I didn't get involved in a lot of the day-to-day running of things. I hired good people and I allowed them to put the processes in place and let them run those parts of the business and then report back. Because reporting is key. So I'm not suggesting you completely be hands-off, because it is still your business and you need to make sure that you're following through on the corporate governance and all the other things which you as a director are legally obliged to do. But it's hiring those people, creating the right culture so they feel they can go and make mistakes, they can try different things. Those are the sorts of things which I try and implement in business. And as I said, it's not just putting a beanbag in the corner. If you take someone like Google, their company culture is really spectacular. They have a rule that 80% of the time their staff work on core business that they are paid to do. But 20% of their time, they often spend doing things which that staff member finds interesting. So some of these innovative products that Google have brought out, they've been from that 20% of time where the staff have been allowed to go and play and go and try different things and then bring that back into the, and at the end of the day, Google benefits. So that's what I mean by culture. Culture is about allowing your people to help you to expand the business. It's not just you having to do it. And that's one of the key things which I try and get across with all of my clients about people, culture. The other thing I think when you're looking at being a good leader is having the ability to laugh at yourself a little bit and accept that you too will make mistakes, and being big enough to apologize to your staff sometimes and say, you know what, I really ballsed up with this, I'm really sorry, I'll get it right. As leaders, it's okay to not have all the answers. And actually sometimes that being that humble also means that your staff are empowered to say, don't worry, I'll get that sorted. I can see you've got things over here. So that's what I think makes a good leader. Since leaving and exiting my business, this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I sit on company boards. I help with strategic growth, but I also work with businesses right in the nitty-gritty. I look at every part of the business and I help them to formulate the right growth plans to help them to get to the next stage of growth. And I'm involved in a lot of different things. So slightly shorter than Craig, but I think Craig covered a lot there, which I kind of agree with. So I'm going to hand over to Rob now.
Thank you, Rob. That's fascinating overview there. Looking forward to unpicking a lot of that, especially some of the recent work, some of the questions and advice you're providing to the boards that you're part of, and some of the common challenges and opportunities that you come across, and how you help them specifically, the questions you ask perhaps, and the structure that you deploy to get closer to helping them. I'd be very interested to hear a little bit more about that. So Miles, over to you, sir.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Rob. So look, from my perspective, I agree with fundamentally a lot of what Craig and Alpa has already said. I guess to give you a bit of background on me, most of my career has been working within big blue chip organisations such as Nationwide Building Society, Lloyds, Capita, and various others as well. So I think I'm probably slightly more aligned to Craig than I am Alpa in terms of my experiences has mainly been around sort of operational changes, transformation, that type of thing, helping businesses grow, not necessarily through sales activities, but more looking at business efficiencies, ensuring that you've got contingency plans in place, scaling, operations and things like that. So I think it's quite good that we seem to have quite a broad mix of different skill sets on this panel, which is great to see. So I've recently set up a business called Lincoln Wick Business Consultants. So fundamentally, I was made redundant at the beginning of the pandemic, set up my own business to really help businesses to become more efficient and effective at what they do. And there's a few ways that can be done, but fundamentally it's looking at things like capacity planning to ensure that you have the right people in the right place at the right time, ensuring that you've got a good strategy that's backed up by data-driven decision making as opposed to gut feel decision making. Something that I find is lacking in a lot of businesses is really effective root cause analysis. A lot of people identify challenges or identify problems and immediately try and put a solution in place, and it may not actually be the root cause of what's causing all the problems. So that issue, whatever it may be, will simply manifest itself in a different way. So that's something that's really worth looking at as well. I think it's probably worthwhile me talking less around the process side of things, which has got a lot of experience in, and probably more around the mentality, to a certain extent, the culture as well, as to why and how you would want to look at changes. So for me, when I look at change and when I help businesses, there's always two ways to look at this. There's always two changes that have to happen. There's the first, whether it's a physical change or not, the actual change to the process or the growth of the business, whatever that might be. But the second, and typically that's, dare I say, relatively straightforward. It could be that you're moving offices, it could be that you're implementing a new process, it could be that you're changing an existing process. Fundamentally, generally, they are pretty straightforward to do, in that you change a document, you provide a bit of training or whatever it might be, and that's it. The second change, which is typically much harder and much more important and requires a lot more work, is the cultural change. So to give you an example, I'm working with a business at the moment who's moving offices. The physical moving of the offices isn't particularly difficult in terms of contracting it out to a provider who can securely transfer the data across that they've got and set the office up and various other bits and pieces. Relatively straightforward task. The other change is it's moving across town. There's less parking at the new premises. The premises fundamentally is an older office. It's not quite as nice as the one that they're currently in. So there's a huge cultural change to bring people on board, and that's the really hard bit around that change, because as I said, the actual physical moving of people from one office to another isn't particularly difficult, but to get their buy-in and to all of a sudden go, well, now you have to pay for parking where you previously didn't have to pay for parking, managing that change and that cultural shift, that's a whole nother challenge that you've got in itself. But I think when it comes to change, and again, I completely agree with a lot of what Craig has said, in that most businesses tend to lose between 20 and 30% in revenue due to inefficiencies within processes. It's huge in terms of what businesses are currently losing. Exactly like what Craig said, it's people who are copying and pasting information, 80 days lost in a year because people are copying and pasting information, and they don't realize that actually, it only takes a couple of seconds to do each one, but when you start adding it up, it makes a massive impact. But I think if I look almost prior to the point of when you actually get to the change, and it's about what does that decision process look like? And for me, I generally, I can sort of break it down into the 5 C's, I call it. So the first one being curiosity, and I think comes back to something that Alpa said as well, is that you have to accept and you have to admit that you're not perfect and you don't know all of the answers. And it could be that you've started your business and you've put processes in place and they work and they're great, but actually are those processes that you've got in place for 1 or 2 people, are they still going to be fit for purpose when you've got 10 or 20 people working in the business? So you always have to stay curious in terms of, is this the best way of doing things? Am I perfect? No. Well, could there be a better way of doing things? So for me, it's always about staying curious. The next one is clarity. So as long as you remain curious, you can then start looking for clarity, and that could be some data, it could be something to prove that there could be a better way of doing something. Once you've got a bit of clarity, and again, that could be that you've managed to get some MI or something like that proves it could be changed, it could be more efficient. It comes down to courage. So once you have a bit of clarity, it gives you a bit of courage to say, yeah, I think there is a better way of doing this, and let's try and look and see if we can actually start implementing that. From there, it's about conviction. So perhaps you've done a pilot, whatever it might be, and you're starting to gain a bit more confidence that it's right. So it's the conviction of, let's actually do this and let's perhaps roll it out over the whole company as opposed to just running it as a pilot. And then the last one is confidence. So once you've done that and you can then see the positive impact that that's had, you gain the confidence to know that actually that process that I've just followed has worked. We've now, improved with our efficiencies or whatever it might be. And then essentially that then cycle just repeats over and over again. So once you've done, you've implemented whatever change it is, you're confident that it's worked. It's then going back to stay curious, because even though you've just reviewed a process or whatever it might be, you've implemented those changes, you know that it's working and it's having a really positive impact. You always have to stay curious, because again, if you've got 10 or 20 people in your business and you set those processes up, are those processes going to be fit for purpose when you've got 50 or 100 people? So for me, it's all about staying curious.
Thanks, Miles. I'm going to turn to our guests now. We've been doing a lot of talking for the last 35 minutes or so. All great stuff. It lays the foundations for a discussion. So I'm encouraging you to. There were some very good reasons why you joined the session to find out a little bit more about strategies for growth. So I would be very interested to hear some of your questions that you might have, where you would like us to go with the discussion from this point forward. So. Michael or Leanna, perhaps, Nick, perhaps share some of the reasons why you're on the session with us this morning, and maybe we can respond directly to some of those questions that you may or may not have. So who'd like to ask a question of the panel? Christopher? No?
Yeah, hi, good morning. As the owner of, my partner and I have two clinics, podiatry, physiotherapy clinics. So I'm always keen to learn or to look at how we can streamline the business efficiently and, look at a manageable growth, grow over a period of time rather than trying to jump in and do too many things at once. So always, I principally came along to really listen and learn and think, well, how can I better improve as a manager and a business owner or leader?
Okay, no, that's very good, Christopher. Well, Christopher, Craig, the point about process, rationalization, refinement, where do you start? What advice would you give to Christopher, who could do lots of things in a range of different, in lots of different ways? What general advice would you give him? From your
Hi, Christopher. Good to see you again.
Likewise. Good to see you.
I think I'd actually go touch on something that Alpa was talking about, and the S word, strategy. I think it's a really important thing to really start with. Where are you taking the clinics? What is the view over the next few years, and really sort of think about what are the things that you think at a high level need to be done to get there, but just as importantly, what are the things that you don't need to do or shouldn't be doing, and that's often one of the much harder things to answer, because, and again, just my experience of setting up and running a business, it's so easy to think that you need to do everything. Like every idea you think of, you're like, right, I got to do that, and very, very quickly, there's only 24 hours in a day, and some of that you need for sleeping. So you've really got to think about what are the things you aren't going to do as well. But essentially, once you've got that strategy laid out, that gives you the sort of first clues as to where you might focus your efforts in terms of looking at the processes and which ones that you would want to streamline and review. And I think that's a lot of businesses that we deal with, they sort of come to us and say, oh, right, we want to streamline processes because we need to cut costs, or we're going to do this new project and we want to make sure we've got resources available for it. But then they don't really know where to start. So they sort of say they've gone to do the processes, but they don't know which process they're actually going to look at. And I think, again, as Alpa was talking about, you might, depending on your strategy, is going to help you figure out where it is. But you might start with the sales process, or you might start with marketing, or you might just start with some of your internal administration. But until you really know where you're going, what the priorities are, I think that's certainly the first step.
Thank you, Craig. Christopher, any comeback for Craig on that?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, and this is the first business that my partner already had the clinic, and I bought into it, and we bought a business together. So I'm a year in, or year and a half in. It's a case of really learning to step back rather than getting involved with everything, which is the tendency to happen. It's right. It's that art of delegation and saying, right, I've empowered you to do this task. Go ahead and do it, and I've got confidence you'll get it right. If you don't, it's not a problem. So yeah, I think I'd agree with Craig. It's very much a case of looking at putting it down into manageable chunks. You're looking at the task and just dividing it up and saying, right, what are we going to achieve this week, this month, the next 6 months? I'd agree. Take on board with that.
Great, Chris. Well, I'm going to invite Alpa to come in next, then Miles. Where does Christopher start on the strategy journey? What's the first step, perhaps, for him to get that strategy muscle exercise more than he is at the moment, perhaps?
So there's a couple of things that I do, Christopher, when I'm looking at sort of building out a strategy. And you're absolutely right about some of the bite-sized things that you're suggesting. But I'd actually spend a bit of time looking at the market out there. So when you're looking at creating strategy, it's all about understanding what's coming up on the horizon, making some assumptions. So some of it is finger in the air stuff, but it's better to know of new practices that are coming out, new products that are coming out, understanding what your competitors are offering in terms of what they're doing. Because once you understand what your competitors are doing, it'll either provide clarity and confidence that actually my strategy is right because everybody's doing it, or it will also allow you to spot, because you spent that time thinking about where you want to go, what that next big thing is, because there's always something coming down the horizon. And most of the time, most business owners that I've worked with tend to just look at the now. And I often say that a business owner, the leader, if you've hired the people to do the job around you, then the leader's role really is to go far ahead. And if you'll forgive the hunting analogy, but to climb on top of the hill and to see where the next big bison are, and they're going to be in the distance. So then it's all right, that's where I want to get to. So how do I work backwards from there to map out that path? And actually, no one else has spotted with that big bison over there is hiding behind that tree, but I have. So what am I going to do to be the first to market to get there? So often it's about spending the time. One of the things which I've found in the past when working with businesses, they spend the time just focusing on the little tasks that they can offload to other people. And they don't spend the time thinking, where are we going to go? What's the big thing? So allow yourself to do that, offload some of the other stuff. And delegation is the key thing. You want to become almost like Mr. Teflon, nothing sticks. As soon as someone gives you something to do, unless it's something you must do, only you can do. If you've got your staff, offload it, because you want to have the time, thinking time. I think that's the key thing. We never give ourselves enough thinking time to just stop, take a breath. And that's something I advise all my clients to do. Something I practice. I stop and think, is this working? Is this the right direction? As Miles said, those clarity, being curious, it's absolutely spot on. Couldn't agree with him more. But that's the sorts of things that you're doing. So when you're doing a strategic plan, remember the strategic plan is never set in stone. Allow yourself to adapt and move that strategic plan. If something isn't working, the questions I would normally ask is, okay, what did we do? Why didn't it work? What could we have done better? Is this something that we want to do again? And I do that with every single sort of element of the strategic plan, because that way you're measuring whether something's working and you're learning from that. And you can't do all of those thinking unless you're sort of giving yourself time to do that. So as Craig said, there's 24 hours in a day. And a lot of the time with the strategic stuff, it's just thinking things through, constantly asking these questions, delegating the minor things which you really don't need to do, so you can focus on the bigger stuff, and you can take go in the direction that the business needs to go, and remembering that the strategy is never set in stone and it will change. You'll try something and say, actually, you know what, that didn't work, and these are the reasons why. We were too early in the market, or there's already a big player, whatever it will be, but you've learned something from that. So even something that didn't work out, if you take the time to learn from that, you can apply it in a much more positive way for something else that you try where it might work better. So it's knowledge. Knowledge is key, I think.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Alpa. On that knowledge front, Christopher, are you reading books, references about helping you with strategy? I've got a couple for you if you haven't.
Yeah, I try to sort of look at what's currently, even a quick Amazon search or whatever gets reviewed at the time. So you tend to look at that, but I'm always open to new ideas. Always open to new thoughts.
Before I bring Miles in, there's a couple, and I'll put this in the chat. I know that the Chamber are very, this is the business model generation, the business canvas model. It's a very simple process. I'd recommend that as a book. And it combines that with innovation and creativity. And there's another one that Craig's holding up as well, which we'll put in the resources
Thank you.
section for you. I think that when Mission works with its clients on strategy, we look at formulation and execution as two linked but distinct parts of the same puzzle, if you like. And I'm sure, Miles, in your experience, you could probably shed some light on, strategy formulation and perhaps and execution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to be honest, I think Alpa's covered a lot, and I agree with pretty much everything that you've said as well there. So it is really about looking at the strategy. I think what I would, to a certain extent, my piece of advice for you, Chris, would be if I could use the analogy of doing a puzzle. So unless you're a complete lunatic, then when you get a puzzle, the first thing that you do is the edges, because they're the simplest ones to do. They're the low-hanging fruit. Once you've done the edges, you then look for potentially a piece that's all the same color, and then you start doing that. And then once you've started doing all of that, then actually the stuff that was harder, that you didn't know where it went, or you can start to see where that sort of fits in, if that makes sense. So I think when it comes to your situation, I would be looking at, well, where's the low-hanging fruit? What is the, what does success look like? Which again, this comes back to the strategy. What does success look like for me? And what are my key indicators for success? So is it that you want to ensure that you've got a great customer experience? If so, what are you doing to measure that? And off the back of those measurements, are you getting anything where people are saying, I'm not happy about X, or I'm not happy about Y? If so, straight away you've got some low-hanging fruit there that you can pick up on straight away. The power of feedback from both employees and clients or customers is absolutely imperative. And something that I find a lot of businesses tend to do is that they're really keen on getting feedback from their customers, and they're willing to throw out, if we'll give a prize draw, if you do this feedback, blah, 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 but they just expect it. It's a given from their employees. They just expect to get this feedback. And I've never understood that, because feedback from your employees is just as important as feedback from customers. So if you're willing to give a prize out to a customer, why wouldn't you be willing to give a prize out to an employee as well? And it's really, really important that you listen and take on board what they say, because a lot of the time they hold the keys to a lot of answers, and you don't even realize it, because they will do a job day in, day out, and they will find ways of doing things quicker, more efficiently, or they'll go, well, if we just did it like this, actually, that would be a much better experience. Often, though, they either won't come forward and say it because they think, oh, it's just, my opinion doesn't matter. So it's really a case of building, again, going back to what Alpa's saying as well about culture. It's about building a culture of making sure that everyone feels engaged and that they're involved. So they do feel that actually, if I give a suggestion, then it's going to be valued, whether you actually do anything about that, because there will be suggestions that you get from employees which, for whatever reason, aren't right or don't fit. But even those ones, it's hugely important to actually go back and say, look, really appreciate the suggestion. Thank you so much for it. We can't take it forward because of X, Y, and Z reasons, but please keep them coming, because there's nothing worse than employees putting suggestions in or saying, why don't we do something like this? If they get ignored, they will never suggest anything going forward. Their view of the business is, they don't listen to me, I don't really care anymore, you know, what's the point of me being here? So massively, massively important. But I think going back to my original point, it's try and look for the quick wins. You know, identify what success looks like, identify what those key measures are to measure what that success is, and then see if there's any quick wins in there.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Thank you.
I think that helps, Christopher.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Lots of reference in there. Craig, I'm going to come to you. The relationship between process, technology, and strategy. You know, which comes first? I think I know what the answer is. From your work and experience with clients looking to streamline or make their businesses more efficient, do you always start with the question of strategy first?
Yes, in most cases, although I really liked what Miles was just saying. He used a little analogy, which is one of my favorites, which is when I'm trying to encourage people to get started, I said every business is like a jigsaw puzzle. And you look for those sort of little guide rails first. So actually, if strategy is absent and you're looking to, you know, do something about that to move to the next level, you need data, you need information. I was talking about going out to look at the market, understand your competition, where's the next bison hiding, but you've also got a lot of information in your existing business. And so sometimes there is almost like a pre-strategy piece you can do around understanding the current structures and processes and so on, just to gather what's going on today. Then you can go and, you know, that helps to inform your strategy, and then out of that you'll then come back to looking at your processes. The other thing I think is quite interesting is that there's often so many organizations that I've worked with, there is so setting a strategy is great, and one of the important things about that is getting people in the organization to buy into it, to sort of follow, help make sure everyone's going in the right direction. But so often processes aren't aligned with the strategy. It's like, we've got these processes, we've got this stuff we do, we've now set a new strategy, let's go and do it. But the processes are still yesterday's processes, if you like. And along with the processes, of course, is the people. The processes are the work you do to help achieve some sort of outcome, and you need people to do those. And so a really important thing is making sure, if you've got a strategy, have you gone back and reflected on the processes to make sure that they now reflect what you're trying to achieve? And do you have the right people with the right skills and capabilities to actually execute those processes? And so there's I said, in my experience, there's often a big piece of work that's missing around that alignment. Some organizations will go, right, we've got an organizational structure, we've got some processes, we've got a strategy, let's go. But the two things have all been developed almost independently. So it's thinking about how all of those things align, fit together to achieve a common goal.
Could you call that, draw a sort of a ring around those points and put a label of capabilities on there? And if so, Alpa, is that something that you look at when you work with your clients, looking at the capabilities? We might have the aspirations to take on the world and succeed, but how much thought is put into the capabilities that we have to execute the strategy that we've just defined? What's your experience on that?
All the time, because capability is key. You know, you could develop the best strategy in the world, but if it's not followed or if it's not measured against something, then it's going to fail. So whenever I'm working, particularly with the smaller size businesses that I work with, the fundamental questions is, right, you know, when we do the strategic piece, and we normally break it down. If you can imagine, strategy is like 5 spokes to a wheel. You've got sales, marketing, infrastructure, process, finance. You're looking at all of those. So in your strategic planning, you're looking at all of those elements. So, you know, it's all very well and good setting something and saying we're going to do this. And then the next part of that, to answer your question, Rob, is the capability side. one of the pieces we do is looking at, okay, we've got this strategic plan, who's going to do it? And normally the business owner will know what the key strengths of their individual employees are. And then the third thing we do is we present, or I don't present, the owner presents the strategy back to the staff. This is part of the culture piece, that you've done the strategic stuff and then you present it back to the staff, and you actually allow the staff to pull it apart. And that's quite difficult for the business owner because it's their baby and someone's calling. But what it does is it then highlights a couple of things. From the capability point of view, you get buy-in from staff. So they're more comfortable saying, actually, I'd love to do that bit of the strategic plan. And the owner will then either say, okay, there you go, and let them go off and create that process, or work with them to develop that process. So it shouldn't ever be done in silo. I agree with everything that Craig has said, that they're often separated. And really, once the strategic bit is done, the culture bit kicks in, staff agree to it, everyone is then pulling, in the same direction. And then you quickly say, okay, who's got the capabilities? And that's where you can say, okay, additional training, additional support can be given. That can either come through the chamber or through some of the training providers that we use, which then helps to sharpen up the skills. And that also implements culture, because it then makes it inclusive and you're taking everyone with you. So that the process doesn't get lost, because the staff then feel, yes, I can say this and I'm going to try it this way, and that feeling of being able to own it means that the owner is able to delegate more. So it's all very connected.
Yeah, I see that sort of virtuous circle. A lot relies on the shadow that the leader casts on his team and the environment that's created for people to contribute. So some courageous questions asked of leaders to come face to face with that culture that they in part create. I like the concept of this capability, because there's some great stuff on the on YouTube, dare I say it. Mark A's Turn a Ship Around, for example. Perhaps this is something for you, Miles. When you're looking at developing a strategy through intent-based leadership, it's based on clarity and competence of the people that you've got working with you, regardless of what your strategy is. If you haven't got that clarity and competence, then you're going to miss the target. What's your experience been of organizations developing that clarity and at the same time developing the competence to deliver it?
It's a really good question. And I think a lot of the time, businesses don't get the clarity. I think this is an area where a lot of businesses fall down on. So in my experiences, most businesses tend to be gut feel decision, and so they will have it would be the leader of the business typically will have an idea or have a thought process, or I want to do X, or I want to do Y, whatever it might be, and to do that I think we need to do this. And it's a really difficult one, because ultimately, being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, it all starts from I think I can do this. And it has to, you have to have that mindset to start a business in the first place, because you need to have that confidence in yourself to be able to, plow a load of money into a business and go, I think I can make it work. So it's quite a challenge moving away, or trying to move away from that gut feel. Yeah, I can do it because I'm me, and or I've got a great team around me, so we can get this done. And again, I absolutely think that there is a need for that, to get businesses up and running, or to really sometimes push the boundaries. But for me, it's all about trying to remove that gut feel decision making and actually come down to data driven decision making. Like Craig has said, most businesses have got an absolute wealth of data behind them already. And that could be data on anything. That could be data on processes, it could be data on customers, it could be data on clients, whatever that might be. So it's about making sure that data is being utilized properly and gaining that clarity in the first place, to say, we know from our data that we're spending X amount of time doing this particular task, whatever it might be. And then it's about, essentially having that courage to implement a pilot or whatever it might be. So there still needs to be some gut feeling that this is data. I've got a hypothesis, which is, if I do X, this will be the result. So once you've got the data to back up what your hypothesis is. It's then piloting it and then looking at the results off the back of that. That's when you get that confidence and that conviction to say, yeah, it has worked, my hypothesis is correct, and then you can roll it out on a broader scale. So I definitely think that the clarity side of things is missing within a lot of businesses.
That's very helpful, Miles. I think that one of the references on the chat was Rebecca Homps from London Business School. She talks about assumptions. What assumptions do you hold to be true? And then you plan your strategy based on those assumptions, those clarified, qualified assumptions. It's a really good model to look at, because how far do you plan? You can't plan against the circumstances you can't foresee. Quote some general back in the 1870s, I think, came up with that one. But it's the assumptions piece. What assumptions do we know to be true about our market, our business, of decisions that we can make now to exploit those opportunities? Is that something that you bring into your work, Craig, looking at, as well as the data, as Miles' point, we've got some sort of view on what we think might happen. Let's go and try and find some data that perhaps supports it. There's always going to be an element of taking risk, isn't there, and making a call. Well, what's your view on that, Craig?
I think there's a danger that if you formulated an answer in your head and then you go and search for the data, you will inevitably find data that supports the answer, which isn't necessarily the right thing. And this is an area that I talk about the leap of faith, because I think that there is it's essential to have good data for decision making and planning. But at the same time, if you want to be an innovative or disruptive business, there are just some things that nobody knows, like unknown unknowns. It's, as Alpha talks about, I love the idea of a bison hiding behind a tree. It's like you picture in your mind what a bison hiding behind a tree looks like, right? You might just be able to see the sort of sides of it sticking out. So you could look at that tree and go, well, it looks like a bison's behind the tree, but it might not be. It might be something completely different. So I always think about this is, if you build a business purely around data, like, and this is kind of a personal thing, I think that we'll end up in a situation where we create lots of businesses that are just clones of each other, because how a business develop will become very, very predictable. Whereas if you want to do something different, you almost have to take those leaps of faith. You set that hypothesis and you go and see what happens and play it out. And as I said, I like to call that the leap of faith, that kind of last jump at the end.
Yes, I like that phrase. I'm sure there's some of our guests may have a similar story about their experiences of working with data and strategy. I know that when working with the Chamber, Ross, Anna's mission, through the pandemic, we've had to face down a few truths, haven't we, and make some assumptions about the future of working for the Chamber that we have for mission. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Ross.
Well, absolutely. I put into the chat a trope or a cliche, I don't know what it is, but anyway, that culture is your plan for the unforeseen. It's a bit of a sort of beer mat phraseology, isn't it, really? But I do think there's a lot of truth in it, because we have the most successful businesses, I suppose, over the past 18 months are the ones who've quickly been able to recognize and acknowledge that this is a major shift, tectonic plate stuff. This is a move that is going to transform everything. And you do that from the position of, okay, what are your inherent strengths in your organization? And we all know that it comes down to people, because all of the other aspects flow from those skills. If you want to change your processes, if you want to apply, as Miles was saying, capacity in the right areas, and if you want to look at the right market opportunities, as Alpha was saying, or ensure that you're not just looking at individual bits of data, but having a whole picture, as Craig was touching upon, all of that comes from harnessing, engaging, and liberating the people around you. And the only way you can do that with confidence is if you have a plan for that to be a permanent state of affairs. You don't just say, right now, let's have a culture for a pandemic. you have a culture, and when a pandemic comes along, it rigorously tests whether that culture is effective or not. And I think that's actually what entrepreneurialism is about. I think it's a case of constantly having that entrepreneurial flair and spirit within your organization. And then when something shifts, what happens is the organization just takes that on as an opportunity.
Yes.
And I know that's easily said. Sometimes that's far tougher than that. But as long as the vast majority of us do that, then that keeps the economy moving really well and provides the opportunities for those who are maybe facing even more of a tricky decision-making process. Maybe the whole of their sector's closed or disappeared. But as long as the vast majority have that enterprising approach within their culture, within their organization, I think it works, it holds true. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that the chamber was absolutely 100% in that direction, but there was a lot of work done in the 2 or 3 years before the pandemic came along, so that the teams stood up and recognized that all things were possible.
Yes, it's certainly been my experience of working with you, Ross, that those sorts of things are outcomes of the basics that you deploy. So great quality dialogue and support, and creating that space for people to be creative and innovative and contribute has certainly been our experience.
And what happens is that what happens also is that, and can I just say, Tom is moving on from the organisation. I'd like to thank Tom for all the work he has been doing so much on these Chamber of Solutions events. But it's a classic example of the force of good of being working in a creative and I think a positive culture. That
Yes.
we are creating a generation of young people who are going out into the world and are going to make the changes that we want. That's actually what a Chamber of Commerce is all about. So we celebrate that. But all businesses should be in that position. I used to hear things about, you don't want to take people's skills to a certain point because, you might lose them. Well, we all know the joke that you might actually have a whole load of people in the organization without the skills, and then you'll keep them. Now that is actually something you want to avoid. But really, the real key to this is that as an economically, as a culture, we should really have that sort of self-confidence. And I think this has been a tester. I think we've come through it pretty well, to be honest. But anyway, I just want to say good luck to you, Tom, and we're all right behind you. Keep coming to these events.
Thanks very much, Ross. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
I was just going to pick up on something you were saying there, Ross. I think that we are in an interesting situation where I think there's a danger we could go a little bit backwards. I was, how do I put this? In the early days of the pandemic, I was amazed at how quickly so many businesses were able to transform and carry on running. I used the term digital transformation earlier. The businesses who'd been talking about or allegedly doing digital transformation for years, and then within days and weeks they had done it. and you saw how businesses were able to completely change the way they work and carry on running, and not only carry on running, many businesses actually thrived and did really well. But I think there's a bit of a culture in this country of there has been, of people constantly talking about let's get back to normal, or let's get back to the old ways. And I think, and I've seen it in a couple of instances, there's a danger that we actually slip back into bad old ways of working that we actually fixed during the pandemic, but this mindset of we have to get back to the way it was before and I think that's all businesses, I think, just need to be really conscious of that actually what worked really well, let's not lose that, and let's carry on moving forward. So that's something I think about a lot. I wanted to bring up.
Let's lose the word normal altogether, because some of it was, now we've got a new normal, as if that's got any shelf life at all, Let's just lose the word normal. Well,
there have been some really exciting businesses that have come out of this pandemic that have grown. So if you take subscription businesses, where you pay a monthly fee and you get a box of something, they say that the high street is dying. It's not dying, it's just evolving. So I have a subscription box for this organisation, and when I found out about it, it blew my mind, and it kind of solidifies what I was saying earlier. So you pay a £10 fee, and they send you a box of clothes, and you have a personal shopper who picks the outfits for you, and you use an app and you click the ones you want. It takes the cost of that out, plus reimburses you your £10 styling fee, gives you a bag to put the unwanted clothes in, and sends it out. I have stopped shopping, in retail shops for the simple reason that every couple of months I get this goodie box full of things which I would never consider to wear, but someone else has picked. And that shows that the fact that we've not stopped wearing clothes, we've not stopped buying clothes, but what we have done is we've taken the way in which we're living now, and we've applied that in a very modern 21st century way of doing things. And that's what I mean by looking for that bison, because someone sat down and thought there's got to be a better way of for shopping. Nobody wants to go to the high street anymore for those types of things. So what is that? And actually, that's what I think is what's exciting about where we're going from a technology point of view, and where I think the pandemic has gone. And it has allowed people to think about things outside of the box, which they perhaps wouldn't have done, because the old way and the normal way is always done this way. Actually, it's forced everyone to think, how can we do things better? And that is great for everyone, I think.
Yes, no, that's a really, very good point, Alpa. I know that there's some great information gathering subscription services out there as well. So to challenge your thinking, you might be in a couple of echo chambers perhaps, but there's a few. The World Economic Forum have got a brilliant service where you can triangulate 8 separate subjects. Well, there's loads of different combinations, but it challenges your understanding about subjects that you're interested in. We're using it for a couple of clients, and it's the World Economic Forum app. But there's many like that which challenge you to read different references and make connections between different seemingly unrelated topics. But it's great to challenge your thinking like that. With one eye on time, 10:45, got about 10 minutes left. There's one question I want to ask, but I'm sure John or Nick or any others, Leanna, I know you're representing Andover. Leanna, did some of these conversations resonate with your members?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as we said, this new normal is what we're finding people are just trying to adapt to. We were speaking yesterday at that Andover opening event. It's just about finding that balance between what we can do now sort of via Zoom and what we still want to do face to face. So I think, people are still adjusting. I work for NatWest for business banking, and I cover sort of Surrey, Thames Valley and West London as well. And I think it's really interesting to see businesses that have really done well over the COVID time, and businesses that really have had to change their way of thinking completely. Yes. So yeah, it's really, I think, a scary time for business, but also we have a lot of businesses that are really excited about what's to come. And I think, as somebody said, I'm not sure who it was, about things that businesses have been forced to do probably a lot sooner than they might have done. And actually that pressure for some businesses has probably been quite positive, maybe not at the time, but looking forward, actually it's something that they've maybe been putting off, or something that they didn't want to do. Even for a big business like NatWest, a lot of us are home working now. It's probably something that NatWest would have maybe done in 5-10 years time. But actually what it's done is brought everything forward. We're all hybrid working now. So the majority of the time we work from home. We're very hot on climate. And, the first thing that does is instantly saves time on fuel, driving, trains. That instantly would hopefully help in that sort of situation. And it's just, as I say, made people reassess their work-life balance as well, I think, which has also been really positive. So although it's been maybe it has been a challenging year for everyone in any sort of situation, there's definitely some positives to come out of it. And as I say, that refreshing view on a couple of things as well, which is quite nice.
Great, no, that's really good points, Leanna. I think that the your view of working with lots of different businesses across that area, you get a unique perspective of some of the challenges and opportunities, and great models of success. I'd imagine that most of the positive elements that we've been talking about this morning are representative of those businesses that have emerged or even been formed during the last 18 months, 2 years. There's a sort of set of characteristics which unite all of them. Final call for any more questions from you, our guests. If not, I shall attempt to summarize and hand back to Ross to close the session. I was working with a Chinese university before the pandemic hit, and as a professor, she came up with, everyone's heard of the acronym VUCA. It came out of the military a few years ago, back in the early 90s. Everyone familiar with VUCA? V stands for volatility, U for uncertainty, C complexity, A is ambiguity. These are some of the things that the British armed services were facing in Afghanistan and Iraq. She came up with a nice little antidote to VUCA. Her antidote was, for V, we need a vision. This is the strategic clarity and alignment that Miles is talking about. The U was understanding, so understanding your people, getting close to them, so you understand what their needs are and how they can best be plugged into the operation. C was about courage, taking courage to do the right thing, taking that leap of faith that Craig was talking about. And the A was take action. Indecision is a hole below the waterline, as she put it. So the antidote to VUCA, I think, sums it up quite nicely. Have a vision, understand your people, have the courage, and take some action. Ross, over to you to close the session.
Thanks so much, Rob. Firstly, Alpa, Miles, Craig, thanks so much for everything that you've done today. It's really interesting. And as one of Tom's final departing pieces of work, I suggest that he tries to capture as much of the things that have been said today and share them across the Chamber network, because I think we've learned so much from you all, and it was a very nice blend, coming at it from looking at the same mountain, but coming at it from slightly different angles. But we all agree what the pinnacle, I'm going to stop here, that's just going too far. We all agree what the pinnacle looks like. But I think one of the key things that, and I think Rob sort of touched upon it, is that we all have this responsibility, I think, to get this right together. I mean, the world is a big mutual. We're not in competition with each other. We're not in competition globally. It's everything that has ever happened since the start of the Industrial Revolution is basically about improving the lot for everybody. And so, we come together and work together, and I think we can make this a massive success for each of our individual businesses, but importantly for the economy and the country as a whole. And for that reason, the pandemic has just set us a challenge. It's to reset the whole way that we look at the way that we work together. And I think what's great about these Chamber Solutions events is that they do be that. They are that big share. They do bring people together, and more maybe so. So power to it. If you've got any ideas for future Chamber Solutions events, please do email me directly, and we'll make sure that we put them on. And if there's anybody you want to reach out to and get on board on panels, or even as part of the audience, then please do let me know as well, and we'll make sure that we invite them. They don't have to be Chamber members. This is for everybody. This is for the whole of the community across Hampshire and indeed beyond. There's some good stuff that goes on here, and we put it on about every 6 weeks or so, and we will continue to do so. So finally, thank you so much for all of your input. Thank you so much, panel, for what you've done. And I think it's quite an exciting time. Rob.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you all for joining. Thank you to our panelists. More Chambers of Solutions coming, so please bring along a friend and get involved. So have a great rest of the week, everyone, and thanks once again. Or I'll stay on the line, Ross.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good rest of the week, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Miles.